Hello, everybody, and welcome at another Layer 8 conference. I'm very happy to be here today and to be given the opportunity to present a topic that I hope will inject some new aspects and some new ideas and elements to the people that are working within our industry on the human element of security, either in an offensive or in a defensive capacity. This topic relies heavily on psychology and what I have learned through studying and practicing psychology in my earlier years. And I hope it will help you apply what I have learned in your work in social engineering. A few words about me. My name is Christina Lekati. I have a background and a degree in psychology. I have applied what I've learned in my work as a social engineer, and currently I am a trainer and consultant for CyberRisk GmbH on the human element of security. I am also part of the team that leads the corporate and high-value target vulnerability assessments within our company, and also a very happy and proud member of the Ocean Curious project, along with a team of incredible individuals. Let's dive right in. Who is this talk for? This talk is mostly for social engineers that work in an offensive security capability, the ones that perform attack simulations, and the ones that eventually go and inform their clients about potential vulnerabilities. But it is also for the cybersecurity professionals that are working with the human factor and are trying to get along with their nature, basically, and help them protect themselves and their organizations, either through awareness trainings or through the application and production of policies and better procedures. But it is also for anybody who wants to better understand themselves and who wants to better understand others. So just approach this topic with a curious mind and get out of it whatever fits your work and personal reality better. Let's start right away. There are three important pillars, in my opinion, when we talk about human behavior and social engineering. To be effective in social engineering, first of all, we need to understand people. We need to be able to predict their behavior to a certain degree, because in reality, you can never fully and accurately predict how somebody will react to something. And to be able to influence their behavior with the biggest probability of predictability. Now, for a very long time, we haven't been focusing as much in understanding as much as we have been focusing in influence tactics and in the quick and dirty tricks. And yes, influence principles are very good. We have been talking about influence principles for a very long time. They are highly effective, they are highly accurate, and they are still being used, but they are not the whole story. And although I have nothing against them, yes, I think that although we should still teach people about what influence tactics are and how they are being used against them, we shouldn't only stick with them and feel that our job here is done. By definition and by principle, influence relies on fundamental psychological principles that are hardwired in us and that dictate strong behavioral tendencies. There are our fixed action patterns, or in other words, our very predictable action-reaction patterns. And exactly because of this reliability, they become the quick and dirty tricks that we use. Now, Dr. Robert Cialdini came up with 6 of them in his book, Influence. I believe a lot of you have read it, so I will not dive deeper into them in this talk, but if you haven't read the book, definitely go and pick it up. He talked about the power of reciprocation, consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. We have been using them strategically, and adversaries have been using them strategically in most social engineering schemes, as well, along with other principles like the elements of fear, the elements of time pressure, etc. We have been discussing a lot about them in the industry for a very long time anyway, and we are not going to discuss about them again today. But what we are going to discuss about is the fact that Dr. Cialdini himself, but also the influence principles, are based on the studies and the and the science of social psychology. They are not a distinctive element. They have roots on a lot deeper and larger and older studies that are stemming from social psychology. I feel that for a very long time we skipped the part of understanding people and we went straight into applying the quick and dirty tricks. And although a lot of attackers do the same, this has started to stop being the case. And that's because social engineering engagements and attacks have evolved. And yes, we still have the quick hit and runs, the phishing emails that we still receive in our inboxes, and sometimes they work that have an element of fear, that have the element of time pressure, and all the usual red flags. Yes, these are still out there, and we should still address them, but at the same time, social engineering attacks have evolved. And they have evolved by giving their place to more elaborate campaigns. We have longer reconnaissance phases now, social engineering attacks that are a lot more tailored, a lot more personalized, and use more elaborate mind games. Lately, we have seen deepfakes emerging, and this is a threat that we see coming and that we know will be a big issue in the years to come. But we have also seen ongoing, persistent, state-sponsored social engineering campaigns that are more elaborate, more sophisticated, and they have a stronger psychological background behind them that goes beyond influence and persuasion techniques and the usual dirty tricks that we have been using. Add to that people have started to become aware of influence techniques. Some of them are able to recognize them now. And along with the fact that the defense side has somewhat evolved, so has the offensive side. Let's talk about the basics first, about understanding people, and let's start for the very, very basics so that we can then move on to how this understanding can help us in social engineering engagements to both understand what adversaries do, but to also be able to better simulate them and protect our clients better. Now, one important thing about everyone, about people in general, is that we have two sides in our psychological makeup. On the one hand, we all share specific elements in our human hardwiring. We all have the same basic needs. We all have very strong survival instincts. Our social dynamics are more or less the same, although we are in different cultures. For example, we all want to belong in some sort of group. We want to have a social safety net, trusting relationships, loving relationships. The laws of trust throughout cultures are pretty much the same across everybody. And what is very important, our perception, the processes we use to perceive our environment and people around us are the same across every individual. Our cognitive processes are very similar, but the capabilities are different. And our biopsychology, which is the chemicals and hormones we produce in response to psychological factors, are again the same. For example, the hormones and chemicals that I will produce when I'm under stress are the same as the ones that you will produce when you are under stress. And that's very interesting because the hormones in response create additional psychological effects that will be the same in me, they will be the same in you, and you cannot help it, and I cannot help it. They will be there and they will affect me and you the same. And they can be induced and introduced in engagements, and they already are. On the other hand, there are the individual elements. Our uniqueness is based on our genes. We are all unique in the end of the day. Yes, we share some characteristics, but we are also very unique. We have different genes, a different genetical makeup. We have a different upbringing and environment as we were growing up, which led to past experiences, and the way these past experiences, in combination with our genes, worked out to build us into who we are today. This, in effect, has caused different individual needs in each and every one of us, different individual weaknesses. We all have our individual goals and desires. Our personality got shaped in its own unique way as well. We shaped our own unique identity, and of course, we carry our own beliefs. And social engineers know that and make sure to exploit that. Of course, there are a lot more aspects, but now these are the most relevant ones for this talk. We will start from the very basic and the very universal human wiring. The elements we all share. And specifically, we will look into 4 domains, the 4 main domains of study that focus on our basic human makeup, the way we are built to operate and interact with others, and the way we perceive our environments and we judge it. There are 4 main domains of study, like I said, and I hope that since we cannot deep dive into each and every one of them, I hope you will choose the one that interests you the most by the end of this talk, and perhaps dive a little bit deeper into it. And if you want resources, you can always reach out to me and I will help you study them. First of all, we'll look into social psychology. Like I said before, social psychology is the scientific study of how people think, how people feel, and behave in a social context. Extremely relevant for social engineering attacks. Then second, we have perception, which studies the way sensory information is organized, interpreted, and consciously experienced. So what happens around us and how do we register this information? But beyond registering this information in our heads, then comes cognition. What do we think about the information we receive and how do we process the information we receive through our perception? Cognition studies how people think. All forms of knowing and awareness are complex perceptual processes, conceiving, remembering, reasoning. How do you reason an event? How do you reason the fact that you're under pressure in an attack, during an attack? Our judgment, imagining, problem solving, but also critical thinking. And last, we look into biopsychology, the scientific study of the biology of behavior, which studies again the hormones and the chemicals we produce as a response to certain things that happen in our lives, to certain situations, and how these chemicals and hormones affect our behavior. And of course, we will talk about whether we can induce the production of these hormones and chemicals. We start by the 2 main things, getting back to social engineering attacks, that matter the most in an attack scenario. What do we count on? We count on a good cover, having a good story, a good pretext that is reliable and can be convincing. And we also count in influencing the target's decision making during an attack. This is what we say between one another when we actually organize an attack plan. However, in reality, what happens is that we rely on a target's decision making, which depends on their perception of the situation, the perception of the cover story we will bring to them, but also their cognitive abilities. How will they process this cover story and the requests that we make through the cover story? And because we rely on their perception of the situation and their cognitive abilities, we will start by talking about perception. Now, perception refers to all the information that we collect through our senses and the way we interpret them. However, the information that we collect through our senses at any given moment are simply too many. When you enter your home and you take a look around, you are not going to analyze whether every single furniture is in place. However, if you see a window open, you will pick it up and you will wonder if you left this window open or if anybody else opened it. And this will act as a trigger for you to search around the house a little bit. So we do not process all sensory information because it's extremely energy consuming, and actually every living creature tries to save energy and not spend it aimlessly. So we do not process all sensitive information, but we will spend energy, aka cognitive power, mostly on what we consider important and what we prioritize. And of course, our well being and survival is something we prioritize. But also, our work and our daily activities and certain things that we as individuals find important are things that we prioritize and we will spend more energy on. However, on your day to day, and for example, when you are in a busy station, yes, you will pay attention to what is happening around you, but you will not spend time analyzing every single individual that passes by because there are simply too many. And you will end up being exhausted after an hour or two. Perception is very useful, but it's also a very ironic function. So, from the one hand, it enables us to scan and evaluate our environments and the circumstances we encounter. It does let us know if there is a threat, if we are safe, if there is anything that requires our attention. But at the same time, it is a pretty quick and complex process, and it does not require much energy, nor does it require any analytical capabilities. So, like we said, in a train station, you will just scan around to see if everything is okay, and you will only spend cognitive power if you see to analyze something a little better. If you see someone running around suddenly, your vision will automatically um, focus on them to see whether they ran to catch a train or whether they ran because something happened, or if someone screams, which is something that is not very typical in a train station, for example. Everything else you will blur out a little bit, you will go through to your destination, and that's it. It is basically a highly automated process that relies on appearances, on whether everything generally looks okay, and on snap judgments. And by snap judgments, I mean very, very quick snap judgments. In fact, our brain has developed energy saving capabilities that help us judge situations and people very fast and draw conclusions about them with minimal effort. Now, that's important for social engineers. Why? Because most of the time in attacks during engagements, they want to appear inconspicuous or they want to look like they belong and they blend in. That means that they try to pass under the perceptual threshold. Yeah, somebody will notice you, but they will not spend time on you to actually analyze why you're there or who you are. On the other hand, if you want to get a target to be attracted to you because this is what your pretext requires and you want to engage with them, still you use perception to make the target attracted to you and to try to deliver subliminal messages about who you are and about whether what you look like supports your story. Case in point, we see these two people. Who do you think is more successful? And I don't want you to chew too much on this thought. Just as a snap judgment, who would you say is more successful? Who would you say is more reliable? And who would you say has an opinion that you can trust? Most people tend to reply that it's actually the blonde lady. And that's because of a very interesting phenomenon called the halo effect. The halo effect is a cognitive bias that causes our impression, snap judgment, of someone on one domain to influence our impressions of them on other domains. There are hundreds of studies done on the halo effect that eventually point out that we scan an individual and we just look at the most dominant characteristics, how they are dressed, how they are groomed, and how their body language looks like. And if they are, for example, well dressed, well groomed, we automatically assign also personality traits in them, like reliability, trustworthiness. We judge whether they are successful or not, whether they are someone whose opinion we want, or the exact opposite. Social engineers sometimes use that to their advantage so that they can either appear more trustworthy than they are or just blend in and not make you look at them. For example, we have this lady from a series called The Americans. Some of you might have watched it, and we have 6 of her disguises. In the middle, we see how she looks originally in the series, and the other 6 personas are her disguises in the operations she was running. She was supposed to be a spy in the series. Now, again, by forming snap judgments, by seeing this person somewhere in an environment, by looking at the different disguises, you would be able to tell which one of them is the one that brings trouble. You would be able to tell, and probably most of you would pick the same or very similar ones if I asked you to point out the one that looks the most innocent and harmless, the ones that looks almost foolish, I would say, the one that looks flirty, or the one that looks like a very serious professional that you're not supposed to mess with. And most of you would pick the same people to all of these answers. Every impersonator uses these, not every, but many, the good ones, use these perceptual snap judgments and they implement them in their disguises so that they can have a good basis and they can breed a good and beneficial ground to them. The same happens with the males. We have a few disguises of the same man, and again, probably most of you would pick the same choices if I asked you who is the one that works from 9 to 5 and doesn't really harm a fly. Who is the one who causes the trouble and could be perceived as a little bit of a threat in an environment? Or who is the one that likes to chop woods in a forest every Thursday evening? That's because the halo effect and this cognitive bias is mainly working through stereotypes and through what society has taught us. It is a bit unfortunate, but at the same time, it's just a coping mechanism so that you can scan a number of people fast and effectively without spending energy. So what your brain does is that it says, I will pick specific characteristics and I will rely and overgeneralize based on them. And it will only go into cognitive and analytical work if it feels the need to do so. When it comes to disguises, just for the sake of mentioning it as well, if you ever come to use a disguise, what the brain perceives are the characteristics that stand out the most. For example, hair, clothes, and body language. And the rest of the features, like the eyes, the lips, and the shape of the face, they are a little bit more secondary. Your perceptual brain will not stick with them too much. And they are also the ones that are altered the easiest, either through makeup, through the lipsticks, through facial hair for men, through haircuts, and through changing outfits, or wearing glasses. All these accessories can alter how you look like, and they can also alter the way you are perceived by somebody else. Now, is this useful only for impersonations and for attacks or attack simulations that are happening in person? No, they are not. In fact, they are also being used in the construction of sock puppet accounts. The sock puppet account, Mia Ash, she was built by an APT group, and she was operating for a couple of years, I believe, being very, very effective with her targets. Now, they chose this picture for their sock puppet, and I believe they chose it for a reason. How would you perceive Mia Ash based on how she looks? She's lying down, she's exposing her neck. It's a pretty vulnerable position to be in, I would say. So basically, she wants to look non-threatening, definitely non-threatening because it's an extremely vulnerable position, and maybe a bit inviting for a conversation. These principles are used in the crafting of social engineering personas regularly, and the goal is to either bypass the brain's cognitive filters or just not to raise any suspicions and try to drive a specific message in a very subliminal way that the person that is targeted will not necessarily analyze and critically think on. The same happens with trust, a core element of social engineering attacks. And again, there are many studies on what we assign trust on, who do we assign trustworthiness on, and that's usually on people who look happy and relaxed in an encounter. So it looks very relaxed. People who have a calm and steady voice, who appear to be like us, because when somebody looks like us, we automatically, that's another cognitive bias, we assign to them the same characteristics that we have. We feel like they belong to our tribe and like we could befriend them much easier. Or when they have unexpected behavior under specific circumstances. And this expected behavior under specific circumstances is another interesting story here when it comes to perception. Now, like we said, our brain will spend energy and cognitive power when analyzing a situation only when they have to. At the same time, when we are in an environment, virtual or physical, each of us has a specific preset notion about the behavioral scripts that people are meant to play within that specific environment or situation. For example, when you go to the pool, you and everybody else are expected to walk into the locker room, to take off your shoes, to change into your swimming suits and wear your swimming hat, and then leave all of your belongings in the locking room and go just with your swimming suit and a towel out in the pool area. And try to keep it clean. Either you wear either flip-flops or you go barefoot, but generally you do not wear your outdoor shoes. That's a very clear behavioral script. And if anybody violates that, well, all the others pick up on it and they are usually not very happy. But generally, they notice it immediately, I would say. Now, if you follow the behavioral script, you slide by the perceptual filter. You're under the threshold of noteworthiness, to put it this way. At the same time, if you want to draw attention, if you have to get into an encounter with someone and still you follow the appropriate behavioral script for your pretext, then again, you're good because you might encounter someone but still not make them analyze you or question you more because you are following the guidelines that are expected. And therefore, it is important to be aware of the social setting you are operating in and the local scripts of behavior so that you can better look like you belong in them. Two very classic examples from our industry are tailgating, blending in with people who pass through a security door at the time they are passing through a security door, looking like them, walking like them, being comfortable and calm, following the behavioral script and getting through because you look like you belong, or impersonating. And now, especially especially these days, and now that at least in Germany, people are transitioning back to the office, we have the situation where only 20% of the personnel are in the office buildings, and there have been a lot of new hires or layoffs in the meantime. Something we have noticed with clients is that employees don't know anymore who belongs in the building and who doesn't. So if you walk in the building and you pretend to belong there and to be one of the employees and you follow the behavioral scripts of that company and of the way other people move in the company, usually you can get into rooms and into offices you wouldn't be able to go to otherwise because people would know you don't belong there. But now that there is uncertainty about who is a co-worker and who is not, yeah, it's much easier to walk in. And I would advise people and companies to make sure that employees lock their offices before they leave right now, because there is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to who enters buildings or not. Other practical applications on whether you can bypass the perceptual filters or not, and how you can manipulate these snap judgments. They are, of course, the on-site attack simulations, when you try to blend in, not have anybody question why you are there, or when they question you to not think more of just the basics. In sock puppet accounts conducting online monitoring, for example, I know some of the open source intelligence specialists that we have in the industry, when they want to infiltrate and passively monitor a group, they will look into who is the average Joe of that group, and they will construct a sock puppet account that looks like the average Joe. And that's because they don't want to raise any suspicions, and they don't want to make the admins of that group or other members look more into them. They don't want to stand out. Again, these perceptual filters are used in HUMINT, human intelligence operations, like we saw in the case of Mia Ash. Mia Ash was engaging with her targets for a long time, both withdrawing information for them, but also eventually exploiting them by sending malicious attachments. And they are being used in phishing attack simulations by trying to impersonate others, but also use the way they walk, the way they behave, to use information that is relevant to current situations, and generally try to look like you belong. Yeah. But there will come the time that somebody will question why you are in a specific area, or they will question your intentions in general. And this is when cognition and the cognitive processes, analyzing, critical thinking, start to appear, and things become a little more difficult. When do people move from perceiving a person or a situation to using analytical thinking? They will use analytical thinking when something messes with their priorities or is a priority to them, or when their attention happens to fall on that person or situation, when it draws the attention for some reason. Like we said before with perception, when something doesn't follow the behavioral scripts or what is expected or generally stands out a little bit, it automatically somehow draws our attention and we look at it. Let's start from the priorities. Yes, we pay more attention to what we prioritize. It's a bit logical as well. We want to get our job done on a day-to-day. We pay attention to our families because families tend to be a priority. We pay attention to our personal needs because they are a natural automatic priority. And generally, other information may fade in the background. If it is irrelevant to what we need for our lives, to go through our lives, then your brain will not want to spend extra energy on dealing with it. This can be useful for engagements, especially when you find out that certain employees don't care about their job. When you perform reconnaissance or open source intelligence research and you identify that people are not interested in their workplace, you can also be sure that they do not prioritize security either. So they automatically become low-hanging fruits and easy targets because they will just not spend the cognitive energy required to try and protect their organizations if they don't have personal stakes in it. On the other hand, another thing that we do is that we look into employer review sites and we look for the departments that happen to be under a lot of stress. That's because when people or departments are under a lot of stress, are under a lot of pressure, that stress tends to become a priority, the focus of their attention. And like we said, everything else may fade in the background. If you already have a lot on your plate, you're simply not going to do the extra effort and run the extra mile to keep an organization secure if you can just make a snap judgment, a snap decision, and move on to the stressor, to the situation and the task that is stressing you out and you want to get out of your plate. So departments with extreme pressure or stress are also relatively vulnerable. And then we move on to attention. Attention, yes, we may pay attention to something and try to analyze it and cognitively think about it, but we are only humans. Our capabilities are limited, and therefore, attention is nothing but a shining light to what is relevant to the person. We look at what we pay attention to and we filter out the rest. They blur out in the background. As a social engineer, you either want to bring attention to you so that you can engage a target and make them do something for you, or you want to blur out, like we said. There are attentional failures when we have to process too much information, which means that we are more susceptible to the power of suggestion by somebody else. Or when we are multitasking, because again, our energy is limited, our abilities are limited, and when you multitask, I know there are people that say they can multitask just fine, but the reality is that you spread yourself too thin, especially when it comes to your attention and cognitive processing. A big and important exception here are the individuals that are trained or have the ability, the genetical ability, to have an exceptional situational awareness level. They are the ones that develop their covert attention, that includes a much broader spectrum of information receptiveness and processing. A representative example here are in the domain of security guards. We have probably all seen the security guards that just go through the day. They don't really care about their work. They just sit there. Their presence is there to make a point, but they will not really pay attention to what is happening around. They just exist in the space. They are the ones who look around, who look up at the ceiling, who count the tiles on the floor, and just wait for time to pass by. And I believe you can tell who they are. And then there are the ones that are trained, that are focused. Some of them work in close protection. And these are the ones who are usually sitting still, looking straight, or just looking around, but you can tell they scan you. They scan you, and you can tell that they also use their peripheral vision. They see a lot more than just what is in front of them. They perceive a lot more about their environment, and they use also their other senses, like hearing. People that have exceptional situational awareness level and are trained to notice inconsistencies will stop you and will ask you, and you will be put in a hot seat to have to prove who you are and why you are there, and why you try to engage someone and ask them to do things for you or ask questions. This is when cognitive analysis takes place. It doesn't have to be a security guard. There are certain people within companies that have this ability as well, or that are well trained and are able to process the fact that you don't belong there. Like we said earlier, cognition focuses on how people think, all forms of knowing and awareness, or complex perception processes, conceiving, remembering, reasoning, judging, imagining, and problem solving. But there is one caveat. Yes, we receive information through our senses and through our perceptual abilities, but they get filtered through three main elements: our previous experiences, our knowledge, and our emotions. And based on these three filters, you end up with your thinking outcomes. Now you can imagine that an employee that got only trained for half an hour once per year does not have enough memory of the training, and therefore I could argue that he doesn't have sufficient knowledge to filter out the red flags, to recognize the red flags, and then on the one hand he could see something that he would perceive as suspicious, but the thinking outcome would tell him, you don't know enough about this, you are uncertain, drop it and focus on your other priorities. Now, on the other hand, a well-trained individual, someone that got their lessons through training, that has the whole topic of social engineering and the red flags well stuck in their heads, will filter a perceptual sensation, something that they see as suspicious, through that knowledge. And they will realize that, oh, I remember this person is not supposed to be doing that, or this person is not supposed to be asking that, and this is where I draw a boundary, or this is where I report it, or this is where I ask them why they're here. And the thinking outcome is completely different. So knowledge is extremely important. And cognitive filtering is extremely important. Yes, social engineering becomes a lot more complicated when the target engages in cognitive processes, and this is something that they usually don't want, and this is something that usually scares them. And scares us if we have to run the engagement, although it mostly makes me happy if people sit and think The indications that someone is evaluating you are that they pause and think before they speak. This is when the first drops of sweat start to come down from the attacker. If they ask questions, why are you here? Why are you asking this? Do you have some proof that you're meant to be here, etc.? And if they do not grant you your wishes, oh, you need this piece of information? I'm sorry, but I cannot provide it. Usually, the internal questions that this other person has during a first encounter, the target, four of them stem from Christopher Hadnagy and his book Social Engineering, The Science of Human Hacking. And I have found in my experience that they're very accurate as well. They will wonder who this person is, what do they want, are they a threat, is what they ask suspicious, is it something that could put me into trouble, and how long will this take, because at the end of the day I have so many other things I need to take care of. However, I have also noticed in my experience that another very dominant question that people will subconsciously consider when encountering you and when coming in touch with the request that you make as a social engineer is, what is in it for me? So you ask me to give you this access, but I don't know if I have to, because I don't know if not giving it to you would put me into trouble, which is something that I don't want. And I still don't know if giving this access to you will cause any benefit to me. So if there is no real benefit to me, I might as well play it safe and not provide access. But if you clearly communicate that I will be put into trouble, or that I really need to give you this access because you will run some update, classic scenario, for me that will help me in my work, then my reinforcement is much higher to comply with this request. People will not necessarily ask you these questions out loud in an engagement, but they will run subconsciously, and you are supposed to answer them. Do not underestimate communication capabilities and the power of suggestion, because it has the ability to influence cognitive processes and change the frame. So as a rule of thumb, it's good to have a good pretext to anticipate the target's internal questions and address them before they make the effort to ask them, because they think about them anyway. And last, if you are put in a hot seat and if you can control certain situational and emotional factors before an engagement, I would say do so. Do so because biopsychology plays a big role in our day-to-day activities, in the way our brain works, in the way we take decisions, and it can be influenced and it can hijack cognitive capabilities and the cognitive processes. Like we said before, biopsychology is a scientific study of the biology of behavior, and it is primarily based on hormones and chemicals that are being created through emotions, through stress, or through the lack of sleep or overall fatigue a person might have. Obviously, they are not the only ones, but these are the ones that are most relevant right now for social engineering engagements and what we talk about. The simplest and most straightforward of them all is the lack of sleep. When we are in a state of fatigue and general tiredness, we simply do not process information the same way. Our energy is a lot more limited. So again, you can imagine we cannot focus our attention too much on one thing. We cannot produce critical thinking with the same efficiency and accuracy that we would if we were rested, and so on and so forth. So a lot of little details might slide by simply because there is not enough energy. Emotions are hormone factories, basically. And that's why I believe all of you are familiar with the phrase, I could not think straight. I could not think straight, from people that were either facing extreme positive emotions or bad emotions. Emotions have the tendency to trigger different priorities and introduce new motivations in a situation. For example, if you approach If you approach somebody that causes positive emotions to you, if you like them, if they are able actually to build rapport with you, and you have a good time with them, you produce dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. And the tricky thing about these hormones is that they are very addictive. You want to have more and more of them. You don't want to stop the production of these hormones, and they are really rewarding. These are the hormones that give you what we call rose-colored glasses, which means that you are more likely to turn a blind eye when somebody you like suddenly raises a red flag, or when they do something they're not supposed to do, or when they ask you for something you are not supposed to do. You are more likely to complain, first of all, because you like this person, you want to be consistent, and you want to keep liking them now, especially if they have established themselves as someone that has won you over. And you don't want to stop the production of these hormones, because that's not a happy place to be. And you also have to tell yourself that you were wrong, something we tend not to want to do. Then on the other hand, when we are introduced with negative emotions like fear and tension, we trigger automatic avoidance responses. We produce cortisol and adrenaline, which tell our bodies that we are faced with an emergency situation, that we need to do something about it and avoid these negative emotions. And what do social engineers do? They induce that negative emotion, for example, fear, and then they provide them way out. And the way out is usually leads to exploitation. For example, the emails that induce fear, your account will be deleted and you have to click on that link. The link is your way out of that emotion. Similarly, the stress works in a very similar way. It makes the body believe and act as if there is an emergency. And therefore, your brain, your mind, and your body, they get occupied with this emergency. You have to deal with that stressor, you have to resolve the stressor, and you have to move out of the stressful situation. So priorities shift, your attention shifts, you pay a lot more attention in what is causing you this distress, and you try to resolve it this way, blaring out everything else and letting little red flags slide out just because you do not have the mental capacity to deal with that as well. Your cognitive processes will underfunction. For example, if you're a person that generally wants to eat healthy and does the effort to eat healthy, you might have noticed that when you get under stress, suddenly you will start opting for more junk food, for solutions that are quick and easy, just because you cannot deal with additional mental workload. You cannot think about what you're going to eat today. You already have too much on your plate, so you will opt for whatever is nearby, quick, easy, and finish with it. And you will have this approach with other things in life as well. Stress has the power to dominate over a whole lot of other priorities that we have in life. Now, imagine this in the context of a social engineering engagement. Situational variables can make a whole lot of difference in the outcome of a behavior and a whole lot of difference in an engagement, in a social engineering engagement. Imagine introducing a stressor or a diversion before or during an encounter with a target. We had this very famous example of a social engineering phishing call with a baby cry in the background. And this works so well because our bodies are so in tune to get alerted and stressed out when we hear a baby cry and we want to make it stop really bad. It's part of our hardwiring. Imagine using what we said before by selecting the right timing. For example, Fridays, when everybody is tired, the priority at the time is to finish off with work and go home and take a rest. Or imagine if you initiate the social engineering attack on a Monday morning when everybody is really busy, they have to deal with the emails from the weekend and just try to set off the week by putting as many things under control as possible. And last, imagine if in your pretext and in your attack scenario, you introduce emotional variables like likability or fear, depending on your pretext. It has a tendency to produce hormones and chemicals and to hijack a lot of cognitive abilities. And unfortunately, there is not too much that we can do about it. Or is it? This whole section, I know, sounds very glooming for all of us that also work in a defensive capacity, that want to protect humans. And somehow I know that I'm here telling you how many limits we have as human beings and how easy it is to manipulate these limits, unfortunately. But there are also good news, because whatever we know and learn that is being used in an offensive capacity, we can also try to take into account when we develop a defensive strategy. And I think that this is something we haven't really done as an industry. We haven't taken into account the human capabilities and limitations, and we just go around introducing whatever strategy we have in mind without keeping into account how people are really made, how they operate, what they can do. However, part of the solution lies again in biopsychology and in the fact that our brains are capable of creating new behavioral pathways, new security habits that can become automatic. And this is very good news. The way our professor explained neuroplasticity back in the days that I was in college was as an undefined path. She told us that basically every new skill that we learn, with every new skill, it's like we are carving a new mental pathway. In the beginning, there is no path. You have to put a lot of effort into figuring out and energy into figuring out where to go and in which direction to move and how. But eventually, the more you practice this skill, the deeper this path becomes and the clearer it becomes, until at some point you have a very clear mental pathway and you do not have to spend any effort, any cognitive capability, and it's just an automatic path that you follow, and that's it. And it just happens automatically. And that's what we want with people when they come across social engineering attacks. We want them to be able to recognize red flags, and we want these red flags to act like cognitive triggers, which means that I see it and I don't spend any time trying to figure out whether I should comply or not with this individual. And I just set directly a clear boundary, because I understand that I am not supposed to give credentials, for example, through the phone, or I am not supposed to let anybody in specific rooms other than person ABC. And a lot more things, like I automatically lock my screen when I leave the office. I automatically lock the office itself. I do not plug USBs, and a lot more elaborate habits in the end. But this happens it does not happen when you train employees for half an hour per year and then just turn around and say, oh, humans are the weakest link. See, I did everything, I trained them, and it didn't pay off. Yes, it didn't pay off because you only offered the message once. You made them walk this path. It was effortful, it was hard, it was not pleasant, and then you left them in their own devices instead of reinforcing it and working on them. So as defenders, to bypass these limitations and to create an environment where people view security as a shared responsibility, it is a very good idea, first of all, to have clear policies and procedures that minimize employee decision making wherever possible. So they are supposed to know what their response should be to specific requests, for example. At the same time, good quality training that actively engages employees is a must. Training that is personal, training that intrigues people, training they can relate to and interests them, and not just training that is out of the box and has one relevant message and 15 irrelevant ones, because then it's dull and it only becomes an irritation. It doesn't reinforce anything. Having a security mindset within the organization and cultivating it, it is an ongoing process. And with it, utilizing group influence tactics, again, social psychology. Group influence means that if everybody else follows a specific habit, a specific ritual or rule, others will tend to want to follow it as well because we comply with the group behaviors. And that starts from leadership. But that's another topic. And last, run exercises, run attack simulations, and reinforce these good practices because when people get to actively see how attacks look like and have to respond to them, learning becomes easier. They will remember it. And remember, when we filter cognitively what happens perceptually, past experiences and knowledge are two of the main factors that help us reach the right conclusion in a situation. So there are some good news. Now we close, and this is the last part of this presentation, with the targeted and tailored attacks, because we will have to deal with more of them in the years to come. The targeted and tailored attacks focus on some of the universal elements of behavior, but at the core, they take advantage of our individual needs, weaknesses, goals, personalities, etc. What are these targeted tailored attacks? Where sometimes they look as long-term social engineering attacks. In the past couple of months, we had quite a few reports becoming public. In reality, there are a lot more cases, but finally we have some documented reports. For example, Facebook came out and reported a small army of fake online personas that were aiming to contact targets, to build trust, and click them into clicking on malicious links. This is in their blog. And also Proofpoint came out with a couple of cases. One of them was the case of Marcella Flores, who was a sock puppet account operated by the group TA456. And it targeted one person. And what was very characteristic about this case, but has happened in other cases as well, was that Marcella Flores, this persona, was engaging her target for over a year. She was communicating with him. She established a rapport based on the topics he liked and he enjoyed, he wanted to talk about, but also his individual makeup. Targeted and tailored attacks that utilize our individual uniqueness and motives are also employed during insider threat recruitment campaigns, another topic we don't talk enough about, and in human intelligence and espionage operations. Like we said, they start by counting on specific universal needs that all people have. Maslow put it best. They are very accurate. Now, most of us have covered our physiological and safety needs, but a whole lot of us still have gaps when it comes to satisfying our need for love and belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. So what social engineers working on these long-term campaigns will base their approach on is that they will offer the sense of belonging. They will offer appreciation and respect and build that person's self-esteem so that they can open up to them a little bit more. And they usually don't reach self-actualization, but they use esteem and the need for belonging to entice. They also know some other universal motivating factors. The fact that we need people and we like people who make us feel good about ourselves, Maslow. We want to engage with people that serve some sort of our personal interests and that satisfy an unmet need. And we also generally like to hang around people that look and act like us because this is our tribal instinct. This is where we feel safe. This is where we feel best at. With people that are on the same wavelength, it feels like a small oasis because other than that, yeah, we don't have in life a lot of people that can get to the same wavelength. So it's something very precious and something that also social engineers try to mirror and exploit, unfortunately. So starting from that basis and from what is known about human wiring, they develop their attacks based on the target's self-interests, goals, and desires. Basically, what happens is a relatively quick profiling. I have a whole other talk on how this profiling on specific targets is happening. I presented it at DEFCON, but I can also send you the link or the slides if you want to contact me. Basically, they identify the person's self-interests, goals, and desires and try to serve them or their unmet needs and weaknesses. They try to identify whether there are any addictions because bribery and blackmail are cybersecurity weapons when it comes to humans, especially when it comes to insider threats. And then they try to identify, again, through the profiling process, personality traits, their strong beliefs, their self-identity, and based on that, they build rapport. Self-identity is an important factor because through social psychology, now we know that people are very stubborn about their self-identity and they don't want to deviate from that. So if someone is portraying themselves as someone or believes that they are helpful and supportive towards others, or if they are, they will not want to deviate from that. If a social engineer identifies this element, they will treat it as a weakness and they will exploit it because they know that if we refuse help, if somebody who believes that they are helpful refuses to give help, they will have to face a lot of guilt all of a sudden because it deviates from who they believe they are, and they will perceive it as betraying their values and themselves. The long-term attacks are very sad and they are very painful for the victims. It's a pity that we have to deal with that as well. Unfortunately, they are not simply based on short-lived influence tactics. That's because you cannot engage with the target through influence tactics for a very, very long time. At some point, they figure out that something is wrong. But on the other hand, they are based on building personal relationships. And they somewhat look like the real relationships and the genuine relationships that we form. Now, as they progress, more information about the individual becomes available and it becomes utilized and exploited. And there are additional opportunities for bonding tactics, which means that the more they engage with the target, the more they are able to groom them into the perfect victims. Now, us social engineers that are working on a defensive security, we cannot run the tailored long-term social engineering attacks as engagements. It's also hugely unethical. But what we need to do and what we have to do is to learn to read the targets in a more specialized way, to find these potentially exploitable vulnerabilities, and to help them become aware of those and to protect themselves and their organizations. What we can do on the defense is to teach them very clear and completely non-negotiable boundaries. It is a non-negotiable to give confidential information or to disclose company strategies or anything that happens within the company and is of importance. It is a non-negotiable to provide access. It is a non-negotiable to open any email through the corporate network, for example, to teach them a healthy dose of suspicion and to teach them threat awareness, but also self-awareness. And that happens through the target vulnerability assessments. Yes, it all sounds a bit pessimistic, but it is not as much because I believe that we can still guard the gates. The people we work with, they can still guard the gates. As long as they are equipped with the skills and knowledge necessary to do so. And on the other hand, it is also very difficult from the side of an impersonator to be perfect. They cannot be perfect at all levels. They cannot be extremely consistent and not raise any flags at any point. They too will make mistakes because they too have to battle their own human limits and the fact that they cannot predict everything. And as long as we make sure that we build a workforce that knows how to handle these situations, that knows how to ask the right questions, but also set the right boundaries, and we truly build this capability in there, I believe we can, and I hope we can have a more optimistic and better years ahead as an industry. Now, I know that this has been quite a lot of information. I hope you will deep dive a little bit more on some aspects of it. So please, I ask you to reach out with questions, even through text, even through Twitter, I don't mind. And reach out if you want additional resources and if you want me to help you out. I will be very happy to answer and to help you be better if I can and where I can. Thank you for being here. I look forward to the other talks. I'm pretty sure everybody has something to offer, and let's work for a better year in terms of security ahead. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.